We read in the Parsha of Shemini, Vahi b'yom Shemini, and it was on the 8th day. The Torah tells us that for 7 days, Moshe would erect the Mishkan, dismantle it, and he officiated, bringing various types of sacrifices, various levels of service, and he officiated as a Kohen would officiate. Aaron and his children, they did not officiate as Kohanim. They were only instated as Kohanim only on the 8th day. This is when Aaron was instated as the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and his children, his sons, his 4 sons, as ordinary Kohanim. This was on the 8th day. On the 8th day, the Mishkan took on a level of permanence, not to be dismantled only when they would travel. It would be dismantled, and when they would camp, it would be erected. So it was on the 8th day, Korah Moshe Aaron Levanov. It was on the 8th day, Moshe called Aaron and his sons, Ulezikne Yisrael, and the elders of Yisrael, the elders of Israel. So Rashi explains in his commentary, Vehi b'yom Shemini limiluim. This was the 8th day of the inauguration. And what day was this? Hu Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Shuhukam HaMishkan Bo B'yom. The Mishkan was erected to take on a permanence on that day. V'notal Eser Atoros Hashnuis B'Seder Olam. And that day, there were 10 special distinctions on that day. So on this, the Sifsei Chachamim, who's a commentator in Rashi, cites what were the 10 distinctions. So he explains the Vadai who Rosh Chodesh Nishnu Hukam Mishkan Bo B'yom became Shemtzinu Doya Kedusha Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and then he quotes Valze Pirush Nota Asora Toros Hashnuis B'Seder Olam Rotzloma Da'amina B'Seder Olam V'Loma Hiniach Kodesh Baruch Hu L'Kol Amalo Sheos Mishar Yom Kedusha and Lav, because this day was designated for the Hakomas HaMishkan, for the erection of the Mishkan. We find there's an argument in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, what month did God create the world? Did God create the world in Tishrei, or did he create the world in Nisan? The Mishkan was erected to take on a permanence on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Aaron was instated to be the high priest on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. We'd mentioned that the Kohanim were only qualified to be Kohanim only if they officiated in their vestments, in the Big Day Kuna. We find that the vestments, when they were made for Aaron, they're referred to as Lekavod U'Tiferes, for honor and for glory. Lekavod U'Tiferes. And I had mentioned in the past, the Shalach Kodesh, who writes that initially the vestment was meant to be the human body. The body is the vestment for the neshama, for the soul. And initially, Adam Arishon was considered the priest. He was the Kohen. And he would have been qualified to officiate in his vestment, which was his physicality. Because his physicality was spiritualized. This is pre-sin of the Eitz Hadas, eating of the tree of knowledge. Because he had putrefied his body by eating of the Eitz Hadas, which is Tov Ra, he allowed evil to intermingle into his being. Therefore, he was no longer qualified to be the officiant of Hashem. Was no longer qualified. Moshe Rabbeinu, because of his level of negation and achievement and spiritualization, Moshe did not need the vestments to officiate. He was able to officiate just by covering his nakedness. As the Gemara tells us, he officiated b'cholok lovan, in a white tunic. That was sufficient, because his body was his vestment. The Ramchal writes that the only two people whose neshama was within the body, rather than hovering over the head, was Adam Arishon, pre-sin, because the body itself was the domicile or the repository for the neshama, and Moshe Rabbeinu. After the chet of eating of the Eitz Hadas, his body was no longer qualified to be able to retain the holiness of the neshama. So even Adam, it hovered over his head. But Moshe Rabbeinu, what was the location of his soul, his neshama? That was his body itself. Adam was the original Kohen Gadol, the high priest. Who replaced Adam? Aaron. Now, what day of existence was Adam created? The sixth day of creation was the day he was created. The sixth day of creation, according to one opinion, was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So when did Adam assume the role as the officiant of God? Rosh Chodesh Nisan. When did Aaron assume the role of being instated to be the fully functioning officiant of God? This was on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So we find this corollary. So now, we've mentioned, based on the Mishkan Chuma, that we find there's a corollary between the Mishkan and creation. We've said this a number of times, but each time we advance it a little further. We find the Torah juxtaposes the building of the Mishkan to the prohibition of doing Melacha on Shabbos. The Torah says, Losasko Melacha, juxtaposed to the building of the Mishkan, to tell us, to teach us that what creative activity is one not permitted to do on Shabbos, the creative activity that was needed for the building of the Mishkan. What relevance does the Mishkan have? The creative activity that was needed to build the Mishkan, what relevance does that have to do with observing the Shabbos or desecrating the Shabbos? Lo sasko malocha, you're not permitted to do creative activity on Shabbos. So the Midrash tells us that we find there's a correlation between the Mishkan and creation. There's a representation of every aspect of creation found in the Mishkan, meaning the Mishkan itself is a microcosm of existence. A microcosm. For instance, we find at time of creation, God says, Yikovu Hamoyim, let the water gather and let the dry land be seen. What is a representation of that? The Kior, the laver in the Mishkan. The water was gathered in the laver. We find God said, let there be a spreading in the middle of the heavens. There should be a Rekia, B'toch HaMoyim, in the middle of the water. We find, the Pasuk says, the verse says, Nota Shamayim Kayuriyo. God spread the heaven like a curtain. There were curtains, there were Urios, there were curtains in the Mishkan. So we find there's a representation of existence in the Mishkan, meaning the Mishkan is a microcosm of existence. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, when God said, Vasili migdosh v'shachanti b'socham, make for me a sanctuary, I will dwell in your midst. What happened? The Shekhinah, the Divine Presence, entered into the Mishkan, into the Holy of Holies. So what is that the equivalent of? It's the equivalent of initially when God created existence, God entered into existence. As God initially entered into existence, which was His creation, God entered into existence what we created. Vasili Mishkan, Migdosh v'shchanti b'tochan, make for me the Migdosh and I will dwell. You make the Migdosh. We are the creators. We created existence following His blueprint, God's blueprint. And He entered into it. The Gemara tells us in Megillah, Vayhi b'yom Shemini, that the same joy that God had when He created existence, as it says, Vayer Vayivoker, identity, that was the joy He had on the 8th day of the permanence of the Mishkan. Why? What happened when God created existence? Well, His intent was fulfilled. He was able to enter existence and dwell together with man. With Adam, what happened when Adam failed? God departed from existence. So the intent of creation could not be fulfilled. When was it fulfilled on a permanent level? With the building of the Mishkan. So the intent, the original intent of creation waited a few thousand years to be implemented with the building of the Mishkan. So therefore the simcha, the joy God had initially when he created existence, that identical joy came about now. That's Vayi b'yom Shemini. So we have many corresponding factors. The Mishkan is creation. The Mishkan was erected to take on a permanent level on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. This is when existence was created. Rosh Chodesh Nisan. This is when Adam came on the scene. Adam was created. Adam was the Kohen Gadol initially. He was able to officiate without vestments, because his body was this vestment. He putrefied it as a result of the eating of the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. He was disqualified. Aaron is instated as the high priest with vestments, 8 vestments, l'chavru teferes, for kavod, for honor and glory. See, he is the equivalent of Adam. Originally, he was the first man who was created. We find that, based on a verse in Yechezkel, the classification of the Jewish people is Adam. Atem krim Adam, hem lo krim Adam. Meaning, Adam's original role as Adam, who was meant to function on a spiritual plane, which he failed, we assume that position. Atem krim Adam, the original Adam. And as the Malbim explains, and the Maral explains, that why is Adam called Adam? Because Kimina Adama Lukoch, he was taken from the earth. So the Maral asks, but the animal was also taken from the earth. But the animal is referred to as Behema, and the Adam is Adam. So he explains what exactly is earth. Earth is a representation of unlimited potential, unlimited growth. If you cultivate it, unlimited growth emanates from it. If you leave it fallow, it remains a clump of earth. Adam represents advancement. A Jew could advance himself to unlimited spiritual heights. An animal is limited to what it is. Its limitation is finite in the most limited level. Small animal, large animal. It only increases in volume. But in its essence, it's identically the same. A Jew, we find that Shlomo tells us in Koheles that he envies the dead over the living. What does it mean? He envies the dead over the living. When a person's born, nobody knows exactly how that person's life is going to unfold and evolve. Will he succeed? Will he evolve properly? Nobody knows. But when a person dies, you know exactly what he accomplished, what he didn't accomplish. So therefore, when a person, if he addresses his potential, it's something which is not to be fathomed, the level of accomplishment. We have no idea, we don't even have the capacity to appreciate what spiritual growth is, what spiritual accomplishment is. And this is what he envied. Or he loved the dead more than the living, because when a person dies, we could quantify what did he do with his life. When a person's born, everybody's happy, but where's the child going? The Medrash equates it, explains it with an allegory. When a ship goes out to sea, this tremendous fanfare. Everybody's rejoicing, seeing the people off, but nobody knows if the ship's coming back. The ship may go down at sea, but when the ship returns, then you know it was a successful sea voyage. Same thing with a person's life. It's only when the person comes to existence, there's tremendous joy. Does anybody know how this person's life is going to unfold? Nobody knows. It could be disastrous. I mean, the Gemara says in Eruvin that there was an argument between Beis Shammai, Bisil, the house of Shammai, and the house of Hillel. Noach l'odom shenivra, or Noach l'odom shelo nivra. Would have been best for man to be created, or Noach, or would have been best not to be created. So, Beis Shammai, Bisil, the house of Shammai, they debated this issue for 2.5 years. At the end of 2.5 years of this debate, there was a consensus, Noach lo l'odom shelo nivra. It would have been best for man not to be created. Why? Most people fail. Most people do not succeed in their journey through life, spiritually speaking. Said Noach lo shelo nivra. So therefore, when do you see a person? But initially everybody's rejoicing at the birth of a child. Do you know how his life is going to unfold? Nobody knows. It's only at the end when you're able to quantify it. So Adam failed. Initially, he was qualified to be, he was Adam. But we are Adam. Atem kruyim Adam. So when did we assume the Adam in conjunction with the Shechina? Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Who is the ultimate Adam? The Kohen Gadol. He is the ultimate of the ultimate. We find the Kohanim are referred to as Rashis. They are the chosen. The Kohen Gadol is the chosen of the chosen. He's the high priest. He wears 8 vestments. His vestments are 8. 8 always signifies supernatural. That transcends the physical. 7 is physical. Somebody asked me a question, which was a very good question. If Shemini 8 always transcends the physical, because 7 represents the physicality, so why was creation created in 7 days? It should be created in 8 days. Because before the Chet of Adam Arishon, 7 was spiritual. Before he sinned. So why is 8? Why is that the number that signifies, if it is signifies spirituality, so initially creation should have been 8, not 7. Should have been 8 days of creation. So what I said was that before the Chet of Adam Rishon, 7 was supernatural. What we see in this physical existence, that's unnatural. What we call nature, that's unnatural. So the 7 we're referring to is not the original 7. That's not the original 7. The original 7 is supernatural. For instance, the bracha that we say when we eat bread is Hamotzi lechem min oretz. Bread grows out of the ground. I mean, does bread grow out of the ground? I mean, you have the plant, and then you have the wheat kernel, then you have to thresh it, and you have to remove the husk, and you have to mill it, and you have to add water, knead it, bake it, till it finally becomes an entity which is edible. So what do you mean, Hamotzi lechem min oretz? At the end of time, bread will go directly out of the ground. But it's unheard of. No, that's the way it's supposed to be. The world, because it became corrupted as a result of the evil, the world is not functioning properly. The world exists in a dysfunctional state. 7 represents dysfunctionality. But before the Chet, 7 was spiritual. So the 8 is beyond the 7. So the 8 is only after Aaron was appointed to be the Kohen Gadol. That's after the Chet. As the person who possesses, we're all tainted with the Ra, with the impurity of Adam, every one of us. So for him, his essence is 7. He wears 8 to signify, but what's his function? His function is beyond. He transcends the physical. His effect, his value is beyond the physical. That's the significance of the 8 vestments, that Shemoni Begodim. The Midrash tells us that they brought the Mishkan to Moshe because they weren't able to erect the Mishkan. So Rashi explains over there, because the Mishkan was too heavy. The weight of the beams, humanly, was impossible to lift. And they couldn't lift it. They would have lifted it. They bring it to Moshe. Moshe, we can't. Moshe says to HaKadosh Baruch, says to God, humanly, it's not possible to lift. He says, you just do the action, and it will lift by itself. And Moshe was the one who was making the Mishkan. As it says, Vayokem Moshe sa Mishkan. He erected the Mishkan. Because God wanted Moshe to participate in the Mishkan, because he did not participate in the Binyan HaMishkan, in the building of the Mishkan. Now, why did God want Moshe to participate in the erection of the Mishkan? Why? It simply means, if you have a Jew like Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the most special Jew who ever lived, Anav Mikol Adam, no one was ever as humble as him. He's Eved Hashem. It's Moshe Abdi. Moshe, who brought the Torah into existence. Such a special Jew, of course you want him to be the one to erect the Mishkan. He should be the one. But maybe we could say a little more than that. That it's true. The Torah begins, Bereshis bara Elokim Eisa Shemayim V'Soretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So Chazal tell us, Bereshis is really a conjunction. Bishvil Reshis. For the sake of the chosen, God created existence. Bishvil Torah Shenikus Reshis. God created existence for the sake of Torah. This is the proven ground. to implement the trials and tribulations within the context of Torah. This is the playing field. Bishvil Yisrael Shnikaracious. And which people have relevance to be able to perform at that level? Only Klal Yisrael. Only we have that ability. That's alluded to in the first word of the Torah. Bereshis Bar Elokim. This universe with the galaxies, it's for the sake of Torah, for the sake of Klal Yisrael. Now, who's Moshe? The Mishkan is creation. It's the microcosm of creation. Now, who establishes and maintains that creation? Moshe. Who's Moshe? Moshe is the Amud HaTorah. Moshe Rabbeinu is the what? Is the pillar of Torah. He's the conduit. He's the embodiment of Torah. That's Moshe. So, what is considered the creation of existence? The erection of the Mishkan. And who erects the Mishkan? Who's making the Mishkan? Moshe. This signifies Bereshis Bar Elokim Eisa Shamayim Ve'Eisa Oretz. This is what it's about. Therefore, it had to be Moshe. Why? So why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu want Moshe to do it? To emphasize this point, Chazal tell us, based on the pasuk, the verse says, "Em lo brisi yom v'loilo." If not for my covenant that is in effect day and night, chukes shemayim v'ortz lo samti. The extent of heaven and earth would not be in place. So Rav Chaim Volozhiner and the Chofetz Chaim, they said as Zohar, that if there would be a moment in existence where Torah would not be studied anywhere in the world would revert back to pre-existence. Torah always has to be in effect. So what gives meaning and value to existence? What causes the energy flow that God wills existence? It's because Torah exists here. So what gave the Mishkan its form and its function? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was making the Mishkan. V'yoka Moshe said Mishkan. Because he's Torah. This is the Bereshis Bar Elokim. He is the Torah itself. The value of the Mishkan only has value if it's coupled with the Torah itself. And of course, all the laws, who's qualified to be the Kohen? Which animal, which species qualifies? In what context do you officiate? What is considered proper service? What's not proper service? There's all Torah itself. It has to conform with Torah. It doesn't conform with Torah, it has no relevance, it has no value. So that's Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is the Torah. Now, find something interesting. We read about the tragedy in this week's parsha of the death of Nadav and Avihu. Vayikhu b'nei Aaron Nadav Avihu. This is after the Shekhinah, the divine presence, came into the Mishkan. The Jews prostrated themselves when they saw the divine presence. It says each one took his fire pan, vayidnu ben eish, and they put fire in it. Vayisimu alei ketoris, and they took incense. Vayakrivu l'fnei Hashem eish zorah. They brought before God a strange fire, an alien fire, shelotzi v'osam. So as the Rechaim HaKodesh explains, why was it an eish zorah? Why was it an alien fire? Because God did not command it. So they had no right to bring it. Therefore it's alien. V'teitze eish l'fnei Hashem, v'tochal osam v'yamisu l'fnei Hashem. So they brought the fire before God. They were immediately consumed and they died. Okay? V'yomer Moshe el Aaron. Moshe says to Aaron, these Nadav and Avihu were the upcoming Gedolei Yisrael. They were going to be the successors of Moshe and Aaron. And here, at young age, they're 13 and 14 years old, they're struck down. A tragedy not to be processed. V'yomer shel Aaron, hu asher diber Hashem leimor. This is what God said, saying, V'krovoya kodesh. With those who are closest to me, I will be sanctified. V'alpnei kol ha'avei koved. And in the presence of all the people, I will be honored. Vayidom Aaron. When Aaron heard this, he remained silent. So Rashi cites the Midrash. Echad diber. Where did God say? This is what I said. Moshe says, this is what God said. Where did God say this? God originally had said, V'no'arti shama, I will meet them there. Livnei Yisrael v'nigdash b'chvodi. I will be sanctified with my honor. So the Midrash says, Al tikrei b'chvodi. It should not be read with my honor. Ela b'mechubodai. Those who honor me. Those who honor me, I will sanctify through them. Me through their death. Omalo Moshe. LaAaron. Moshe says to Aaron, Aaron Ochi, Aaron my brother. Yodea Yisi Shis Kadish Habayis B'miyudov Shel Mokum. I knew the house will be sanctified through those who are the intimates of God. Yisi Sover Obi Oboch. Initially I thought it was me or you. Moshe Rabbeinu was Shoko Keneg Yisrael. He was the equivalent of the Oklal Yisrael. Aaron, in certain aspects, was the equivalent of his brother. So I thought initially, if there's going to be, who are the Miyodov? Who are those who are most intimate with him? I thought initially it would be, I will die, you will die. Now that I see that they were chosen to bring about this Kiddush Hashem, they're greater than the two of us. And therefore they were chosen. This is the Krovei HaKodesh. So Rameir Simcha Vinsk explains why when the Mishkan, why when it was erected on a permanent level, why did those who were closest to God, the most honored ones, who lived their lives to sanctify God, why did they have to lose their lives? So he explains, the Gemara tells us that whoever says HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a vatron, God, when he evaluates a person's record, there are certain oversights. The minor infractions he doesn't include within the record. The person who says that, his life should be compromised. Because even the most special person, every nuance of failure is taken into account and evaluated to be part of the record of the person. And justice will be implemented. So therefore, anybody who says that God's willing to look away, his life should be neglected. That's the Gemara. Now, Nadav and Avihu, this was their only sin. This was their sin. So Moshe Rabbeinu, he had as great as he was, but factually he had sin. Aaron had sin. Chet Egel, he participated, whatever that was. Moshe, he asked questions. He was obstinate in the dialogue with Hashem at the burning bush. Whatever it was, Nadav and Avihu were the purest in this. This was their only failing. So to display and to demonstrate God's exactness of justice, who are the prime candidates for this? Nadav and Avihu. This is B'miyudoi. This is B'mechubodai. With those who are my honored ones, I will be sanctified. That's why they were chosen. Now, the Midrash tells us that the death of Nadav and Avihu was considered Midas Hadin. The Midrash says שכבר אומר לו הקדוש ברוך הוא ונוערתי שם לבני ישראל נקדש בכבודי. This is what God had said to Moshe. I will meet the Bnei Yisrael there, and I will sanctify miskadesh ani sham b'mechubodoi. I will be sanctified those who were most honored to me. Moshe mishamish kol shiva shemei miluim. Moshe officiated for the 7 days of inauguration. Misyori lomar shema midas adin pogaspo. He was afraid to say anything because he was concerned that the attribute of justice would come upon Shinemar. V'chvodi v'lo oso ela omar la'aron. So the Midrash says, Kamen sheshamru ubo yom Shemini. The 8th day came. Nichnasu Nadav Avihu lahakrif. Nadav Avihu, they came to officiate. Upoga behen midas hadin. Meaning, based on midas harachim, this failing would have not warranted death. There could have been a delay. They could have done tshuva. But Nadav and Avihu, they entered to officiate, and they were burnt. So what was the basis for their death? Because the attribute of justice came at this moment. Okay, now, we're saying the Mishkan is a correlation of creation. Aaron is the equivalent of Adam before the sin. He's the high priest. He needs the vestments because the vestments are in place of his body, because the body is no longer qualified, because the body has been putrefied. Aaron, Moshe, erected the Mishkan, because this emphasizes what is the objective of existence? Torah. Because Moshe is an embodiment of Torah. The Torah begins, Bereshis bara Elokim Eisa Shamayim V'Soretz. Initially, the intent of creation was that the attribute of justice should be in place. Because God saw that the world cannot continue within the context of the attribute of justice, He coalesced into it Midas HaRachmim. But what was the very beginning? Midas Hadin. Now, how this is a replication of creation. How did creation start? Elokim. Nodav aviu b'miyodei HaKadosh. Those who are most intimate with me, I will be sanctified. This is the display of Midas Hadin. It started, God, its din, its exactness. So Moshe thought that exactness would be demonstrated either through myself or you. I saw it was them. Because to bring it to that level of clarity, they are better examples to communicate this fact, this reality. Therefore, they had to die. But again, it's Midas Hadin. So again, we find this correlation between the Mishkan and existence, literally in exact continuum. From the beginning, continuing throughout. The Torah says, Vayidom Aaron. Aaron remained silent. After he heard what Moshe had said, Bekrovei HaKodesh, those who are closest to me, I will sanctify. Vayidom Aaron, Hoyelo Adova Linachoma. See, initially, before I saw the Midrash, the Sefarno says, why did he remain silent? It was a consolation to him. It was comforting, understanding what the value of the death was. To bring about the ultimate Kiddush Hashem, the ultimate sanctification of God's name. That's how the Sefarno explains the basis. What was the value of the silence? I mean, a person should writhe in pain and not be able to contain that level of pain. To lose such special children. There was a nechama, there was a consolation. There was something comforting. They were the object of Kiddush Hashem. But factually, it's the Medrash. V'yidom Aaron, hoyo dovazel l'nechama. This, hearing this information from Moshe Rabbeinu, this was a consolation for him. This was comforting. L'kach nemar, shomem mitzvah lo yidei v'ro. The one who observes a mitzvah lo yidei v'ro. Even though they died, lo yidei, what was the value of that death? The value of this death was the ultimate level. This was Kiddush Hashem at the most advanced level. This was before every Jew in the world. God demonstrating His exactness of judgment. This is Surah Tomei Polo. This is Ein Ovel. There's no iniquity. Even in the negative, there's no iniquity. It's exactness. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not a mevater. There's no oversight, even to the smallest detail. We read at the end of the portion of Mishpatim, Klal Yisrael said, Nasa v'nishma, at the time we received the Torah at Sinai. So the Torah tells us that Moshe ascended the mountain. Vayal Moshe ve'Aaron nodav aviu shivim ziknei Yisrael. Moshe ascended. Aaron ascended to a point. Nodav aviu ascended to a point, and the 70 elders of Israel. And when they ascended, what were they privy to? They were privy to a level of God's presence which the rest of them were not privy to. Vayiru es Elokei Yisrael, and they saw the God of Israel. The tachas raglav k'masid livnas hasapir chetzim hashoyim lotor. It was a level of divine presence which it's not possible to understand what this means. And they gazed at it. They gazed directly at God's so-called Kaviyochel's countenance. Velatzile b'nei Yisrael lo sholach yodo. And to the youth, or to the princes of the sons of Israel, God did not extend His hand. He did not cause them to die. Vayerzu es Elokim. They gazed at God. Vayochel v'yishtu, to be the equivalent of a person sating himself through eating and drinking. They gazed and they were sated with that gazing. But factually, it was a disrespect. Rashi says, "Hoy mistaklim believe gas." It was with a certain earthiness, a certain lack of refinement, the way they gazed at it. So Rashi cites the Midrash, Nitztaklu v'yitzitzu. They gazed and they peeked in the Schayvim Misa, and they deserved death for this. That was the level of disrespect. It's interesting, people read books that when, a person goes to negotiate a deal, there's all kinds of body language posturing. That when you meet the person, you should look him straight in the eye. It shows strength, that you have fortitude, you have confidence, and you're in control. But actually, it's a degree of arrogance. It's arrogance to look God directly, Kaviyochel, in the eye, to look directly at the Shekhinah. The Gemara tells us, the Medrash tells us, we find that by the burning bush, by the sneh, when Moshe approached, because he saw something unusual, that the bush was burning and it wasn't consumed. So it says, immediately as he approaches the bush, so the Malach calls to Moshe, it says, you're standing on hallowed ground. Shal nalechem al raglecha, remove your shoes. The moment Moshe realizes, he turns his face away. He did not look at the Shekhinah, did not look at the divine presence. So the Gemara says, because he did not look at the divine presence, he would not look. Therefore, when he ascended from the mountain and he radiated, people could not look at him. That was the measure for measure. Because he had that humility and that level of respect and negation to the Shekhinah, to divine presence, therefore nobody could gaze at his countenance. That's the holiness he radiated. So this is the antithesis of what Moshe did. You're going to gaze directly at the Shekhinah, at the divine presence. It's a disrespect. You deserve to die. God didn't want to actually to undermine and to intermingle the joy of Torah with this tragedy. God waited. Ad Yom Chanukas HaMishkan. He waited till the inauguration of the Mishkan. And for the elders, this is when the Jews were complaining that they wanted meat. It says the fire burnt and it consumed the edge of the camp. And the Midrash says, meaning the officers. So the Shivim Zakanim were consumed during that incident. Another view, they met their end at the time of the Chagdukas on the 8th day of the inauguration when the Mishkan took on its level of permanence. It's interesting. Both are punished. What's the level? The Zakanim had to be punished. That was their atonement. It was a chil Hashem, what they had done. As the Gemara tells us, a person can do tshuva, a person repents, a person experiences Yom Kippur, a person even has suffering in his life. But for chil Hashem, the atonement is only complete when a person dies. So they died. How did they die? The equivalent of, in the vernacular, they were swept under the carpet. Nadav Avihu, how did they meet their death? B'krovei HaKodesh. Do you know what this is? This is the ultimate Kiddush Hashem. Even though they failed. They did fail. But what was the value of their life? The value of their life was that in the history of existence, this is the first time and last time it was demonstrated that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not a Vatron. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Kel Emes. He's Daino Emes. There's no iniquity in his judgment. They were the object of that. What's the schus of that? So in terms of what they accomplished in their death, it was greater, more than they accomplished could have accomplished during their lifetimes. Because they were objects. So two things took place simultaneously. They had an atonement. They had a kapara. In addition, there was the ultimate level of Kiddush Hashem, which took place over here. We find that Reuven was the firstborn of Yaakov, the first son of Leah. And as the firstborn, as the Bechor, rightfully he should have had Malchus, he should have had royalty, he should have been the royalty of the Jewish people, and he should have been the Kohen, the officiant. But because of what happened after Rachel had passed away, that Yaakov took his bed and put it in the tent of the maidservant of Rachel, Bilhah, he took this very personally, and without consulting with his father, he took his father's bed and put it in the tent of Leah. Although Leah was a matriarch, and Bilhah was only a maidservant, it was considered a grave, grave sin to be the equivalent of Vayishkav, Reuven es Bila Pilegashav. It was considered as if, God forbid, he cohabited with his father's concubine. But what was the greatness of the sin? What was so serious? Where was the location of the divine presence before the Mishkan? So Chazal tell us, Hey Nei Merkava. Wherever the patriarchs were, that was the location of divine presence in the world. Could you imagine? A person says, we have a problem today with the Arabs. They claim the Temple Mount's theirs. You know something? We'll move it somewhere else. God says, this is my location, not anywhere else. God says, my location is where Yaakov designates where his location is. Reuven says, but I'm offended. I'm going to designate it in the tent of my mother because she's a matriarch rather than the tent of a maidservant. So he's tampering with the ultimate. When you tamper with the ultimate, it's unforgivable. And Yaakov refers to him as pachas kamayim. You're an impulsive person, and because of impulsivity, therefore, you will not be the Kohen, and you will not be the king. So as a result of this emotional handicap which he had, he lost both, the ultimate. Okay? Now the question is, was he ever compensated? So it's pointed out something interesting. We find that Yosef was the apple of his father's eye. He was the apple. He was Ben Zekunim. It says, Vayev Yisrael es Yosef b'kol banov. He loved him more than all his children. Ki Ben Zekunim lo. He was the wisest. He resembled him for many reasons. And there was tremendous strife between them. Eventually, he seeks out his brothers, and they think he's only come to find fault with them. They attack him. They're about to murder him. Murder, to that degree. Of course, justified according to their understanding, because they felt he was a pursuer. So Reuven immediately intervenes, and he says, rather than kill him, throw him in one of the pits. And what was Reuven's intention? That ultimately he would come back, and he would take him out of the pit. Take him out of the pit to save his life. Unfortunately, he wasn't there that day. Caravan of Arabs came. He was sold into slavery. Now, there's a Sephara over there that says something profound. He says, Reuven intervened. If Reuven wouldn't have intervened at that moment, Yosef would have been murdered. He would have been killed. Once a person is killed, it cannot be brought back to life. This is what we call the muvus luchalisko. It's an iniquity which cannot be corrected. You pass a certain line, you can't return. It cannot be corrected. So therefore he says, throw him in the pit. Now, Reuven, how was he able to? He was also the brunt of Yosef's tailbearing. But how could he take such control? Because he learned the bitter lesson well. When a person is enraged and angered, you lose control. You have no control over your emotion. And you do things which you regret, which you can never retract afterwards. Reuven experienced that personally. When his father had taken his bed and put it in the tent of Bilah, he acted impulsively. And he understood what was the consequence of that impulsive behavior. He lost malchus, he lost royalty, he lost kuna. That lesson was so deeply embedded in his emotion mind, he would never allow this to happen again. When he sees his brothers being drawn into identically his state of mind, he understands, if God forbid he's killed, you can't bring him back to life. But that's why he had control, because he learned the lesson so well. He says, throw him in the pit. So let's understand now. We find that Yaakov believed that Yosef was devoured by a beast. Yaakov grieved for 22 years. Why did he grieve to such a degree? And he could not be consoled, because he had something was conveyed to him by God, that if any one of his children die in his lifetime, he will go to Gehenna and will not have a share in the world to come. If any of his children die in his lifetime. Now, who was Yaakov? Yaakov was meant to father the 12 tribes of Israel, which are referred to as Shiftei Koh. They are the eternal people. If any of his children die, there will not be an eternal people. If there will not be an eternal people, there will not be a Kabbalah Satorah. There's not going to be a Sinai. Existence will not meet its objective. That's what's going to be. And Yaakov understood this. He's inconsolable. As much as his family, whatever, he's inconsolable. He cannot be consoled. He failed. But let's say, God forbid, Yosef would have been killed. The purpose, the objective of creation would come to an end at that moment. So that there was a Sinai, that is a Klal Yisrael, that ultimately the world will achieve its level of perfection, and L'chvodi Barosiv, and God's glory will be addressed. Who was all that attributed to? To Reuven's failing. Because Reuven had learned the lesson so well that you're not allowed, you cannot be drawn into impulsive behavior, therefore he was not murdered. So why would they tell 12 tribes? Why was there an Ephraim and Menashe? Due to Yosef, due to Reuven taking control. So because of his failing, although he lost Malchus, he lost royalty, and he lost Kuna, but ultimately what did he gain? He gained it all. That lesson caused that he was the savior of the entire value and spirituality of existence, and all God's glory in a certain way is all attributed to Reuven. This is his level of accomplishment. It's phenomenal. So I was thinking, the Yalkut says that anything that's recorded in Torah is for posterity, even beyond posterity. It's eternal. That if Reuven would have known that it would be recorded in the Torah, that his intent when he said he should be thrown into the pit was to retrieve him, to bring him back to his father, if he would have known that was recorded in the Torah, he would have taken Yosef immediately out of the pit, put him on his shoulder, and with a musical accompaniment brought him back to his father. That's how ecstatic he would have been. He'd say, you know what it means to be recorded in such a positive vein in the Torah, which is the book, the eternal book. This is Bishvil Torah Shnikras Reish. The world was created for this, and he's part of that, integral part of it. But what we're saying now, it's even more than that. What was the value of that? The value of that is Klal Yisrael. Because he said, put him in the pit, and the Torah tells us what his intention is. Not that he should die in the pit, that he should retrieve him from the pit. What is that retrieval? What is the value of that retrieval? That there should be a Klal Yisrael. Therefore, understanding that, he would have been a level of ecstasy, it would have been uncontrollable. That would have been his level of joy at the time. We find that after Aaron had officiated on the 8th day, Vayovo Moshe v'Aaron elo moed. Moshe and Aaron, they came to the communal tent, the communion tent. Vayetzu v'vorchasam, Vayero k'vod Hashem el kol ha'om. And the honor of God appeared before the people. Vateitze eish mifnei Hashem, a fire had come from before God. Vatochal al mizbeach, and it consumed the mizbeach, es olav sachalovim, the burnt offering, the fats. Vayar kol ha'om, and all the people, they saw the Shekhinah, the divine presence. Vayironu, and they called out. Vayivlach name, they prostrated themselves. So Rashi over here cites a midrash. Davar acher, Aaron shekorvu kol hakorbanos. Aaron had seen that he brought all the sacrifices, v'nasu kol hamasim, and he had done all the activities that he was instructed to do. V'lo yarda Shekhinah Yisrael, the Shekhinah did not descend. Hoyim mitztayer, v'omer, he was pained, and he said to his brother Moshe, Yodeani shekos HaKadosh Baruch Hu olai, God is angry with me, because he participated in the sin of the golden calf. Ubishvilu yarda Shekhinah Yisrael, and it's account of myself, because of my failings, the divine presence did not come. Amalo leMoshe, Moshe ochi kach osisi li shenechnasti v'nispayashti. Why do you do this to me? I entered and you disgraced me. Miyad nichnas Moshe imo bikshu rachmim yod Shekhinah Yisrael. Immediately Moshe had gone in together with Moshe into the Ol Moed, in the communion tent, and they bikshu rachmim. What is bikshu? They asked for rachmim. They supplicated God for mercy. V'yor the Shechina Yisrael. The Shechina descended. It's very interesting. We find that Moshe originally was chosen to be the Redeemer, the Goel. Moshe comes, presents his credentials, performs the miracles to show that he's God's agent, and it says Vayaminam. The people believe. He has the code word, Pokut Pakadati. Everything's in place. Immediately, there's a work stoppage. The Jews are not working. Paro, being an astute king, monarch, he knows exactly how to get them back to work. Initially, there was a straw subsidy from the government, and they had to meet a quota of bricks. We're withdrawing the straw subsidy. But we're going to demand the quota of bricks as they produced earlier. And if not, they're going to be beaten. They have too much time on their hands to think. We're going to straighten them out. Okay? So rather than things getting better, they got worse. Moshe Rabbeinu comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Hashem, says, Lama Yeros Lama Zeh. Why are you making it more difficult for them? It's supposed to be getting better. Why is it getting worse before it's getting better? Lama Harosa, Lama Zeh Shlachtoni. So God says, I don't have to share it with you. He says, if that's the case, you shouldn't have sent me as your agent. God says, Atotire. Because of your lack of faith in me, you will see the redemption from Egypt, but you will not enter into the land. That was a failing on Moshe Rabbeinu's part. Now the question is, why do things have to get worse before they get better? Actually, they did. They got worse before they get better. Soon afterwards, the 10 months before they left, they were not in physical bondage any longer. So the Rechaim HaKodesh explains over there, he says something phenomenal. The way God created existence, whenever there's a change in existence, there's always a resistance before the change. For instance, what is the darkest part of night? The end of night is the darkest part of night. Because since the transition is going to day, whenever there's a transition in existence, there's always an intense resistance before that transition takes place. So therefore there's an intensification at that moment. So that's why the end of night is the darkest part of night. What is the hottest part of the summer? The end of summer is the hottest part of the summer. The end of winter is the coldest part of the winter. Because whenever there's a transition in existence, there's always an intensification before the change can take place. So the Rechaim HaKodesh explains, we're told there's bondage for 210 years. It's bondage to redemption, to Gula. We're talking about not only in the physical sense, there's going to be spiritual upheavals going from a state of impurity to a state of purity. So there's a change, not only the physical and the spiritual. Whenever such a change is taking place, there's an unlimited level of resistance and intensification. Therefore, before it gets better, it has to get worse. That's how the Rechaim explains why the bondage intensified before it was relieved. Okay? Why was Miriam called Miriam? Miriam is a beautiful name. Miriam HaNeviah, Moshe's sister. She sang the Shira after the splitting of the sea with the women. She stood by to see when her brother was put in the basket. Miriam was special. She was considered one of the leaders of Klal Yisrael, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. But why is she called Miriam? Because she's called Miriam. Miriam, the word means morim. It was the most bitter part of the bondage. When she was born, the bondage intensified to such a degree, it was the most difficult part of the bondage. As it says, Vayimoru Chayim, Bavod Kosher, they embittered their lives with hard work. It was when Miriam was born. That's when it started. And that was the last 80 so on years before the redemption. So the Maral of Prague in the Course says, why? Why, when she was born, why did it have to? When she was born, she was the oldest of the 3 children of Yocheved. She was going to be one of the 3 Parnasim, the 3 leaders of the Jewish people. She's the beginning of the change. The moment she came into existence, immediately, existence sensed there's going to be a change. So the resistance to the change happened at that moment. Therefore, there was an intensification of the bondage at that moment. It's Vayimoru Chayim. Same idea. This is what happened. The Shechina, we said the day on the 8th day, God's joy was the equivalent of the day that He created existence. Why was it so joyous? So we explained, because when God created existence initially, what was the intent of creation? That his presence should be on the terrestrial level, not in heaven, together with man. The being who is the special because he chooses to be special, not because he's created as special. This is what the Gemara tells us. Gedolim tzadikim yosem alchei ashoris. A tzaddik is greater than the greatest angel. Because the greatest angel, why is he what he is? Because he was created to be that. A human being was a tzaddik because he made endless choices to achieve that level of piety, of spirituality. So who does God want to be with? He wants to be associated with the human being, not with the angel. But what happened? Adam failed. He putrefied himself in existence by eating of the tree of knowledge, which is tov v'ra, evil. Now, from then till now, the divine presence was not in existence. What happened with the Mishkan? Make for me the sanctuary. I want to dwell in your midst. The original intent of creation is happening at this moment. This is the ultimate level of joy. Until now, the world is vacant of God's presence. You know what kind of upheaval, what kind of transitions take place at this moment? The Shekhinah is not coming. There's a resistance to it. He officiated, brought the sacrifices, did everything exactly according to code. Nothing, not a trace, a nuance, was not done correctly. But but there's a resistance. So how do you overcome that resistance? Bikshu Rachmim. Moshe and Aaron went into Ol Moed. Bikshu Rachmim. Without Midas HaRachmim, Midas HaDin will not allow it. Actually, you have to be perfect at a level, it will not allow it. The Gemara tells us at the end of Sanhedrin that Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda was initially destined to be Mashiach. Why? Because Chizkiyahu, the king of Judah, his father was an evil man. And when he became king, he gathered the whole Jewish people, and he took a Sefer Torah and a sword, and he gave him the ultimatum. He says, either you live by the Torah or you can be pierced by the sword. That was the ultimatum he gave him. Within 2.5 years, every woman and child from Dan to Beersheba were fully proficient in all the laws of spiritual purity. This is the accomplishment. He brought about an upheaval not to be believed. The story with Sancheriv came with millions of troops to destroy Yerushalayim in one swoop. They were destroyed. Chizkiyahu did not have to participate. Why? Because the oil was burning. Because the oil lamps were burning to study Torah unceasingly. That's why. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Chizkiyahu should be Mashiach. And Cheriv is Gog Magog. They're the Armageddon, and Chizkiyahu is going to be Mashiach. Midas Adin comes, the attribute of justice says, not so quick. After the miracle of the destruction of the camp of the Syrian camp, why did Chizkiyahu say Shira? As Moshe said Shira, why didn't he say Shira? He should have sang the praise of God. Midas HaRachmim, he would have been Mashiach. Midas Adin would not allow it. The attribute of justice says there's such a level of exactness, he did not meet that standard of exactness. He will not be. And he wasn't. Moshe, it says, Bikshu Rachmim. They supplicated God with what? Midas Adin, Shekhinah is not coming. We're not perfect enough. But with Rachmim, with mercy, we're able to achieve that. He said, after Bikshu Rachmim, then the Shekhinah came. Then it came and consumed it all. By Yeronom, then they were. But what it was based upon, this Midas HaRachmim, it's phenomenal. Initially, why was Nadam Vavihu struck down? That's the Midas Adin. As we said, what is the Mishkan? It's a replication of creation. Creation started Bereshis Bor Elokim. Elokim. That's Nadam Vavihu. But factually, why did the Shekhinah exist in the Mishkan? Bikshu Rachmim. It's initially it was din, but God saw the world cannot continue with the attribute of justice. He coalesced into justice the attribute of mercy. Only then we could talk about existence. There's a continuum. That's exactly what happened in the Mishkan. To be continued.